Have you ever wondered what happens when power dynamics collide with unexpected love? Picture this, a 58-year-old CEO, confident and commanding, used to being in control of everything, except her own loneliness. Now imagine her crossing paths with a 23-year-old prosecutor, ambitious and idealistic, still figuring out who she is but determined to make her mark on the world. Their worlds couldn't be more different, yet fate has other plans. A high-stakes legal case brings them together in a way neither could have anticipated. At first glance, it seems like just another professional clash, two strong-willed individuals locked in a battle of wits. But beneath the surface lies something deeper, something neither of them saw coming. What started as tension-filled encounters soon turned into moments that would change their lives forever. In this video, we'll take you through an unforgettable journey, a story about love, courage, and breaking societal norms. You'll learn how these two women navigated their differences, faced their fears, and ultimately discovered a connection so powerful it defied all odds. We'll also share some lesser-known insights into the complexities of relationships where age and experience create unique challenges and opportunities for growth. But here's the thing, this isn't just any ordinary love story. It's one filled with twists, emotions, and lessons that will leave you questioning your own beliefs about love and relationships. And trust us, you won't want to miss the ending. Why? Because by the time we reach the final chapter, you'll understand why sometimes the most unexpected connections are the ones that truly transform us. If you're ready to dive into a tale that's equal parts drama, inspiration, and heart, stick around till the end. This is a story you don't want to pause halfway through, it gets better with every twist and turn. Welcome to our channel, where we bring you stories that challenge conventions and spark conversations. If you enjoy thought-provoking content like this, hit that subscribe button so you never miss an upload. Let's get started. The room was a fortress of glass and steel, all sharp angles and polished surfaces. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the sleek mahogany table at the center of Victoria's corporate office. It was a space designed to impress and intimidate. The air smelled faintly of leather and ambition, a fitting backdrop for what was about to unfold. Victoria sat at the head of the table, her posture as impeccable as her tailored navy suit. At 58, she carried herself with an authority that filled the room. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back into a no-nonsense bun, and her piercing blue eyes missed nothing. She had spent decades building her empire, navigating boardrooms full of men who underestimated her only to walk away defeated. This young prosecutor? She wasn't going to rattle Victoria, not if she could help it. Across from her sat Emma, clutching her legal pad tightly, though her expression gave nothing away. At just 23, she looked younger than most people in her position, but there was something about her, something unshakable, that commanded attention. Her dark curls framed her face, and her intelligent brown eyes scanned every document before her with precision. She wasn't here to play games, she was here to do her job. And right now, her job meant questioning one of the most powerful women in the city. Ms. Caldwell, Emma began, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. Can you explain these discrepancies in your company's financial reports? Victoria leaned back slightly in her chair, a slow smile playing on her lips. Discrepancies, she echoed, her tone dripping with skepticism. Or assumptions based on incomplete information? Emma didn't flinch. Instead, she met Victoria's gaze directly, holding it without hesitation. I'll let the evidence speak for itself. But I'd appreciate clarity where possible. For a brief second, Victoria felt something stir within her, a flicker of admiration. This girl wasn't afraid of her. Most people wilted under her glare, but not Emma. There was fire in her, a quiet confidence that refused to back down. Still, Victoria wasn't about to make this easy. You think you can intimidate me, Miss Prosecutor? Victoria asked, her voice low and deliberate, almost playful. Emma raised an eyebrow, unfazed. I don't need intimidation. Just the truth. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken tension. For all their differences, their age, their roles, their worlds, they shared a mutual respect for each other's strength. Neither woman would admit it, but they were equally intrigued. As the meeting continued, the dynamic shifted subtly. Victoria noticed the way Emma's fingers moved gracefully over her notes, how her voice softened when explaining complex details. There was intelligence behind those eyes, yes, but also passion. Emma, meanwhile, couldn't help but admire Victoria's composure. Even under scrutiny, the older woman radiated poise, her every gesture calculated yet effortless. But then came the inevitable pause, the kind that happens when two strong personalities clash and neither is willing to yield. Emma glanced at her watch, signaling the end of their session. "We'll reconvene tomorrow," she said firmly, gathering her papers. Victoria nodded, leaning forward slightly. "Until then, Miss Hartley." Their eyes locked one last time, and for a fleeting moment, something passed between them, something neither could quite name. Then Emma turned and walked out, leaving Victoria alone in the cavernous office. As the door clicked shut, Victoria exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair. She hadn't expected this. Not at all. That young woman, Emma, had challenged her in a way few people ever had. There was something about her, something compelling that Victoria couldn't shake. She stared at the empty chair where Emma had been sitting, replaying their exchange in her mind. Who was this prosecutor who dared to stand toe-to-toe with her? And why did Victoria find herself looking forward to seeing her again? Little did she know, this was only the beginning. Their next encounter would bring even more surprises, and questions neither of them was prepared to answer. As the investigation unfolded, their paths seemed destined to cross repeatedly. It wasn't just about the case anymore, it was about the unspoken energy between them, pulling them closer with each encounter. The more time they spent together, the harder it became to ignore the growing connection that neither of them could quite explain. One evening, after another grueling day of questioning and evidence review, Emma found herself lingering in Victoria's office. The room had grown quieter as the hours passed, leaving only the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Papers were scattered across the table, a testament to the intensity of their work. But for once, the conversation wasn't about numbers or legalities, it was personal. Victoria leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. "You ever feel like no matter how hard you fight, someone somewhere is always waiting to tear you down?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Emma looked up from her notes, surprised by the vulnerability in Victoria's tone. "All the time," she admitted. "Especially when you're trying to prove yourself in a world that doesn't think you belong." For a moment, they simply stared at each other, two women separated by decades but united by shared struggles. Victoria hesitated before continuing, her words measured yet raw. "When I first started out, people told me I'd never make it. They said I was too emotional, too soft. And now? Now I'm accused of being cold, ruthless even. Like there's no winning." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. Emma tilted her head slightly, studying Victoria. "It sounds exhausting," she said gently. Then, after a pause, she added, "But if anyone can handle it, it's you." The compliment caught Victoria off guard, and she glanced away, masking her reaction. Still, Emma noticed the slight flush on her cheeks, and the way Victoria's fingers brushed against the edge of her desk, betraying her unease. For all her confidence, this woman carried scars, ones Emma instinctively wanted to heal. Later that week, during a particularly tense court session, Emma found herself defending Victoria, not because it was part of her strategy, but because it felt necessary. When opposing counsel tried to paint Victoria as manipulative and calculating, Emma stepped in without hesitation. "That's not accurate," Emma interjected, her voice firm. "Ms. Caldwell has built her company from the ground up, facing challenges most people wouldn't survive. To dismiss her achievements as anything less than extraordinary is both unfair and inaccurate." The courtroom fell silent, and Victoria, seated behind her lawyer, looked at Emma with something akin to gratitude. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, Victoria saw not just a prosecutor, but someone who truly understood her. Back at the office later that day, Victoria approached Emma as she packed up her things. In her hand was a steaming cup of coffee. "Thought you might need this," she said, offering it with a small smile. Emma blinked, taken aback. "You didn't have to, I know," Victoria interrupted, her gaze steady. "But I wanted to." The gesture was simple, yet it spoke volumes. As Emma accepted the coffee, their fingers brushed ever so lightly, sending a jolt through both of them. Neither acknowledged it, but the air between them shifted, charged with an undeniable tension. That night, alone in her apartment, Victoria replayed the day's events in her mind. Why had she gone out of her way to bring Emma coffee? Was it just kindness, or something more? She stood by her window, staring out at the city skyline, her thoughts swirling. Am I too old for this? She wondered. Too jaded? Too, everything, but then she remembered the look in Emma's eyes earlier, the way they softened when she spoke, the way they lingered just a fraction longer than necessary. There was something there, something Victoria hadn't felt in years. Something she wasn't sure she deserved. Meanwhile, across town, Emma sat on her couch, clutching the now empty coffee cup. Her mind raced with questions. Why did she do that? Why does it mean so much to me? She knew she should keep her distance. This was a professional relationship, nothing more. Yet, every time Victoria smiled or offered one of those rare glimpses of vulnerability, Emma felt herself drawn in further. She sighed, running a hand through her curls. This is insane, she muttered to herself. I'm crossing lines I shouldn't even be near. And yet, despite the warnings in her head, she couldn't stop thinking about Victoria. About the way her voice softened when she talked about her struggles. About the way she carried herself with such quiet strength. Emma knew better than to entertain these feelings, but logic seemed powerless against the pull she felt. Their final meeting of the week came sooner than either expected. It was late, and the office was nearly empty. They sat across from each other, reviewing documents under the dim glow of a desk lamp. The silence between them was comfortable now, almost intimate. At one point, Emma reached for a file at the same time as Victoria, their hands brushing again. This time, neither pulled away immediately. Instead, they froze, their eyes locking in a moment that stretched into eternity. Victoria's breath hitched, and Emma's pulse quickened. Neither said a word, but the weight of what went unsaid hung heavy in the air. Slowly, reluctantly, they withdrew their hands, returning to their papers as though nothing had happened. Yet, the damage was done. That lingering touch, that unbroken gaze, it changed everything. For the rest of the night, they worked side by side, careful not to meet each other's eyes. But the question lingered, unspoken yet undeniable. What happens now? It started with something simple, a casual invitation that neither of them had planned. After another long day of depositions and strategy sessions, Emma glanced at her watch and sighed. Well, I guess that's enough for today, she said, gathering her things. Victoria looked up from the stack of papers in front of her, hesitating before speaking. You know, you've been working late every night this week, she said, her tone softer than usual. Why don't we call it a night? Grab dinner somewhere? My treat. Emma froze, caught off guard by the offer. Dinner? With Victoria? The idea felt both thrilling and reckless, but she couldn't deny the curiosity tugging at her. Are you sure? She asked, trying to sound nonchalant. Won't people talk? Victoria smirked, leaning back in her chair. Let them. Besides, I think we've earned a break after everything this week has thrown at us. Emma laughed nervously, then nodded. All right. But only if you promise not to interrogate me over dessert. Deal, Victoria replied, standing and grabbing her coat. Though I can't make any promises about the wine. They ended up at a quiet Italian restaurant tucked away in a cobblestone alley. The ambience was warm, with soft lighting and the faint hum of jazz playing in the background. It was worlds away from the sterile conference rooms they'd grown accustomed to, and the change of scenery seemed to loosen something between them. Over plates of pasta and glasses of red wine, their conversation began tentatively, casual remarks about work, the weather, anything safe. But as the evening wore on, the walls they'd built around themselves slowly crumbled. You ever feel like no matter how much you achieve, it's never enough? Victoria asked suddenly, swirling her glass thoughtfully. Her voice carried a weight Emma hadn't heard before. Like you're surrounded by people, but still, alone? Emma studied her, surprised by the vulnerability in her words. All the time, she admitted. I mean, everyone expects so much from me, youngest prosecutor in years, all these big cases, But sometimes I wonder if I'm really cut out for it. Like maybe I'm just pretending to have it all together. Victoria chuckled softly, shaking her head. Welcome to adulthood. We're all just winging it. For the first time that night, they both laughed, a genuine, shared moment of understanding. And from there, the floodgates opened. Victoria spoke candidly about her rise to power, the sacrifices she'd made, the relationships she'd lost along the way. I used to think success would fill the void, she confessed. But it doesn't. Not really. Emma listened intently, nodding when she could relate. She opened up too, sharing stories of her early days in law school, the pressure to prove herself in a male-dominated field. Sometimes I feel like I'm 2 steps behind everyone else, she admitted. Like no matter what I do, it'll never be good enough. But it is, Victoria said firmly, reaching across the table to touch Emma's hand briefly. Trust me, I see it. You're incredible at what you do. The contact sent a shiver through both of them, though neither pulled away immediately. When Victoria finally withdrew her hand, the air between them shifted, charged with unspoken emotion. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the gesture lingering. As the meal wound down, their conversation turned lighter, filled with laughter and playful banter. Victoria teased Emma about her coffee addiction. Honestly, I'm surprised you haven't turned into caffeine yet. While Emma poked fun at Victoria's obsession with perfectionism. I'm telling you, Emma joked, pointing at her empty plate, if you were my boss, I'd quit within a week. No one should demand this level of organization. And yet here you are, Victoria shot back with a grin, voluntarily spending hours poring over spreadsheets with me. Admit it, you secretly enjoy it. Maybe, Emma conceded, smiling mischievously. Or maybe I just like arguing with you. Their eyes locked again, and this time, the humor faded, replaced by something deeper. The atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick with anticipation. When the check arrived, neither moved to leave right away. Instead, they lingered, savoring the last moments of the evening. As they stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around them, providing a stark contrast to the warmth of the restaurant. They walked slowly toward the parking lot, their steps synchronized without effort. At one point, Victoria stopped abruptly, turning to face Emma. For a moment, it seemed like she might say something, but instead, she just stared, her gaze searching. Emma felt her heartbeat quicken. What? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Victoria didn't answer. Instead, she leaned in slightly, closing the distance between them. Their lips were inches apart, breaths mingling in the quiet night. Time seemed to stand still, and then, just as suddenly, Victoria pulled back, stepping away with a shaky exhale. We shouldn't, she murmured, her voice tinged with regret. Emma blinked, trying to steady herself. Right, she said softly, though her disappointment was clear. Of course. Neither spoke as they continued walking, the tension between them palpable. By the time they reached their cars, the mood had shifted, heavy with uncertainty. Well, Emma began awkwardly, fumbling for her keys. Thanks for dinner. I, needed that. Victoria nodded, forcing a small smile. Me too. Good night, Emma. Good night, Victoria. As Emma drove away, her mind raced. Had they almost crossed a line they couldn't come back from? Or had they missed an opportunity they'd regret forever? The days that followed their almost kiss were filled with a quiet tension, one that neither Victoria nor Emma could shake. They tried to act normal during their meetings, burying themselves in work and avoiding the charged glances that threatened to expose the turmoil beneath the surface. But no matter how hard they pushed it aside, the memory of that night lingered, a constant reminder of what had almost happened. For Victoria, the guilt was suffocating. She lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling as her thoughts spiraled. What was I thinking? She berated herself over and over again. The age gap between them loomed larger than ever now, a chasm she wasn't sure they could bridge. Emma was young, vibrant, full of potential, and here she was, a woman twice her age who had lived through enough heartbreaks to know better. She admires me, Victoria whispered into the darkness, her voice heavy with self-reproach. That's all this is. And I'm taking advantage of that. She replayed their moments together, the way Emma had defended her in court, the laughter they'd shared over dinner, the way her hand had felt under hers for that brief second. Each memory only deepened her conflict. Was she selfishly clinging to something she didn't deserve? Or was there something real between them, something worth fighting for? Her fears weren't just internal, the world outside seemed determined to remind her of the impossibility of it all. Colleagues began whispering behind closed doors, speculating about the nature of her relationship with Emma. "Isn't she a little inexperienced?" someone joked during a board meeting, their tone dripping with insinuation. Victoria smiled politely, but inside, she burned with shame. And then there were the societal expectations, the unspoken rules about who should be with whom. Women like her weren't supposed to fall for women like Emma. It wasn't practical, wasn't acceptable. Every glance, every comment reinforced the idea that she was making a mistake. Emma, meanwhile, wrestled with her own doubts. She sat alone in her apartment one evening, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her wide brown eyes looked back at her, uncertain and searching. "You're losing your mind," she muttered aloud. "This isn't you." But deep down, she knew it was her. From the moment she'd first met Victoria, there had been something magnetic about her, something Emma couldn't ignore. Yet the weight of reality pressed down on her relentlessly. What would people say if they found out? How would her family react? Would they see her as reckless, immature, incapable of making sound decisions? Her colleagues didn't help matters. She overheard snatches of gossip in the courthouse hallways. "Did you hear about Caldwell and Hartley? Spending an awful lot of time together," someone laughed nervously. "Can't imagine what that's about." Emma clenched her fists, forcing herself not to turn around. She hated feeling so exposed, so vulnerable. For years, she'd worked tirelessly to prove herself, to show everyone that she belonged in the room, that she could hold her own. Now, it felt like all that progress was unraveling because of a single moment of weakness, and yet, despite the fear, she couldn't deny the connection she felt with Victoria. Their conversations came rushing back to her, the late nights poring over documents, the shared laughter over coffee, the way Victoria's voice softened when she talked about her struggles. Those moments mattered. They meant something. Didn't they? To make sense of it all, both women found themselves revisiting key memories, flashbacks that highlighted just how deeply their bond had grown without either realizing it. For Victoria, it was the image of Emma standing up for her in court, defending her against unfair accusations. That moment had struck a chord within her, awakening a part of herself she thought long buried. And later, when Emma accepted the cup of coffee with a shy smile, it was such a small gesture, yet it carried so much meaning. Emma, too, relived fragments of their time together. She remembered the vulnerability in Victoria's voice when she spoke about feeling isolated, the honesty that broke through her usual armor. She also recalled the warmth in Victoria's touch during their near kiss, the way it sent shivers down her spine even now. These moments weren't fleeting attractions, they were building blocks of trust, respect, and something deeper. Despite the longing pulling them toward each other, the external pressures grew unbearable. One afternoon, while reviewing case files in Victoria's office, Emma accidentally left her phone behind. When she returned to retrieve it, she overheard Victoria speaking heatedly on the phone. "I don't care what people think," Victoria snapped, pacing the room. "No, I'm not reconsidering my decision. Yes, I understand the risks, but some things are worth it." Emma froze in the doorway, unsure whether to interrupt or retreat. Before she could decide, Victoria spotted her and abruptly ended the call. "Emma," she said, her voice tight. "I didn't hear you come back." "Sorry," Emma replied, holding up her phone. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop." Victoria sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's fine. Just politics. Nothing new." But Emma saw right through it. "Is everything okay?" Victoria hesitated, then shook her head. "No. Not really." She gestured for Emma to sit, sinking into her chair. "People are starting to talk. About us. About the amount of time we've been spending together. If word gets out," Emma swallowed hard, bracing herself for what came next. "Are you saying we should stop seeing each other?" No, Victoria said quickly, surprising even herself. But maybe we need to be more careful. For both our sakes. The admission hung in the air, unresolved. Neither woman knew how to move forward, caught between their growing feelings and the consequences of acting on them. As the days passed, the tension reached a breaking point. A crisis emerged, a major development in the investigation that forced them to confront their emotions head-on. Evidence surfaced implicating Victoria directly, threatening to destroy everything she'd built. Panic set in among her legal team, and Emma found herself torn between her duty as a prosecutor and her loyalty to the woman she cared about. Standing in the hallway outside the courtroom, Emma watched Victoria confer with her lawyers, her expression unreadable. For the first time, Emma realized just how fragile this moment was. If she didn't step up, if she didn't choose a side, their fragile connection might shatter completely. Victoria, she called softly, approaching her cautiously. We need to talk. Victoria turned, her eyes locking onto Emma's. In that instant, all pretenses fell away. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, or risk losing each other forever. The storm hit without warning. It began with an anonymous tip, a whistleblower claiming Victoria had orchestrated a scheme to falsify financial records. The allegation spread like wildfire, igniting headlines and sending shockwaves through her company. Overnight, the media painted her as a fraud, a manipulative executive willing to destroy anyone who stood in her way. Investigators swarmed her office, seizing documents and interrogating employees. For the first time in decades, Victoria felt powerless. Emma watched it all unfold from the sidelines, torn between her role as a prosecutor and the growing feelings she harbored for Victoria. Her superiors pressured her to take a hard line against the CEO, reminding her that justice came before personal attachments. But every accusation leveled at Victoria, not at Emma's conscience. She knew the woman behind the headlines, the one who carried the weight of the world on her shoulders yet still found moments of vulnerability to share. Could she really stand by and watch her crumble? One evening, after another grueling day of depositions, Emma arrived at Victoria's penthouse unannounced. The apartment was eerily quiet, the once immaculate space now cluttered with legal papers and empty coffee cups. Victoria sat on the couch, staring blankly at the city skyline beyond her floor-to-ceiling windows. She looked smaller than Emma had ever seen her, defeated, fragile. I heard about the new evidence, Emma said softly, closing the door behind her. Victoria, we need to talk. Victoria didn't turn around. Her voice was cold, cutting. Are you here to arrest me, then? Or just gloat? Emma flinched, taken aback by the venom in her tone. What are you talking about? You think I don't know? Victoria snapped, finally facing her. Her eyes burned with anger and hurt. You've been feeding them information, haven't you? All those late nights, all those conversations, was it all just part of your plan to bring me down? Emma's stomach dropped. No. How could you even think that? Because it makes sense. Victoria shot back, standing abruptly. Why else would someone like you waste so much time on someone like me? You're doing your job, Emma. Admit it. Emma stepped forward, her own frustration bubbling to the surface. Don't do this. Don't push me away when you're scared. I'm not your enemy, Victoria. Oh, aren't you? Victoria countered bitterly. Then why does it feel like my entire life is falling apart because of you? Emma froze, the words hitting her like a punch to the gut. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Then something inside her snapped. Fine, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. If that's what you really believe, then maybe I should leave. Maybe I am wasting my time trying to help someone too stubborn to see the truth. She turned toward the door, heart pounding, ready to walk away for good. But before she could take another step, Victoria's voice stopped her. Wait. Emma paused, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Slowly, she turned to face Victoria, whose expression had softened into something raw and vulnerable. I'm sorry, Victoria whispered, sinking back onto the couch. I'm scared. And I don't know what to do anymore. Emma hesitated, then moved closer, sitting beside her. You don't have to figure it out alone, she said gently. But you have to trust me. Victoria let out a shaky laugh, shaking her head. Trust you? After everything I just said? Yes, Emma replied firmly. Because I care about you, Victoria. More than I should. More than I thought possible. The confession hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Victoria stared at her, searching her face for any hint of falsehood. But all she saw was sincerity, truth laid bare. You can't mean that, Victoria murmured, her voice barely audible. I do, Emma insisted, reaching out to take her hand. From the moment I met you, there was something about you, something I couldn't ignore. And yes, maybe it's reckless. Maybe it's insane. But I've fallen for you, Victoria. Completely. Tears welled up in Victoria's eyes, spilling down her cheeks despite her best efforts to hold them back. She pulled her hand away, covering her face with both hands. You shouldn't feel that way, she choked out. I'm old enough to be your mother. My life is a mess. I'll only ruin yours. No, Emma said fiercely, grabbing her wrists and pulling her hands away. Stop running. Stop pushing me away. Yes, there's an age difference. Yes, our lives are complicated. But none of that matters, not if we care about each other. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, their breaths mingling in the charged silence. Then, slowly, Victoria leaned forward, resting her forehead against Emma's. Her voice was barely a whisper. I feel it too. I have for a while now. But I was afraid of hurting you, of ruining everything. Emma cupped her cheek, brushing away a tear with her thumb. We'll figure it out together. One step at a time. As the night wore on, they talked, for hours, it seemed, about the road ahead. They knew the challenges wouldn't disappear overnight. The scandal would rage on, the scrutiny intensifying. People would judge them, question their motives, doubt their intentions. But for the first time, neither woman felt alone in facing it. We'll get through this, Emma promised, her voice steady. Whatever happens, we'll face it side by side. Victoria nodded, a small, hopeful smile tugging at her lips. Together. The days that followed their heartfelt confession were far from easy. Public scrutiny intensified, with headlines painting their relationship as a scandalous distraction from the investigation. Social media buzzed with speculation, some called it a power imbalance, others dismissed it as a publicity stunt. Through it all, Victoria and Emma clung to each other, determined to weather the storm together. But proving their love wasn't just about silencing critics, it was about overcoming their own fears and doubts. At first, the weight of public opinion felt suffocating. Victoria struggled to reconcile her role as a CEO with the vulnerability she now allowed herself to feel. She had spent years building walls around her heart, convinced that love would only weaken her resolve. Now, every snide comment or judgmental glance threatened to undo the progress she'd made. One evening, after another exhausting day of defending herself in court, Victoria retreated to her penthouse. Emma found her sitting on the balcony, staring out at the city lights. You okay? Emma asked softly, pulling up a chair beside her. Victoria sighed, shaking her head. I don't know anymore. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm too old for this. Too broken. Emma reached out, taking her hand firmly. No one gets to decide what you deserve, not them, not anyone. You've spent your whole life letting people tell you who you should be. Isn't it time you started deciding for yourself? Her words struck a chord within Victoria. Slowly, she began to let go of the fear that had held her back for so long. It wasn't easy, there were moments when doubt crept in, but Emma's unwavering support gave her strength. For the first time in years, Victoria allowed herself to believe that love didn't have to come at the cost of her independence. In fact, it could make her stronger. Meanwhile, Emma faced her own battles. Her colleagues continued to question her judgment, accusing her of compromising her integrity for a personal relationship. At work, she endured whispers behind closed doors and condescending remarks during meetings. Even her family expressed concern when she finally mustered the courage to tell them about Victoria. "You're throwing away your career for someone twice your age," her older brother said bluntly over dinner one night. "Is that really what you want?" Emma bristled, gripping her fork tightly. "It's not about throwing anything away. Victoria matters to me. It's real." Her mother chimed in gently, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "We just worry about you, sweetheart. Are you sure you're ready for everything this will bring?" Emma hesitated, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. But then she thought about Victoria, the way she smiled when she thought no one was looking, the quiet strength she carried beneath her polished exterior. "I don't know if I'm ready," Emma admitted. "But I do know that I've never felt this way before. And I won't walk away because it's hard." Her parents exchanged glances but ultimately nodded, offering their cautious support. Later that week, Emma's best friend Sarah offered an unexpected perspective. Over coffee, Sarah leaned across the table, her expression serious. "Look, I get why people are freaking out. But honestly? Who cares what they think? If you're happy, and she makes you happy, that's all that matters." Emma smiled faintly, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. With each conversation, she grew more confident in her choices. She realized that while the road ahead would be challenging, it was worth fighting for something, or someone, as extraordinary as Victoria. Amidst the struggles, there were moments of joy that reminded them why they'd chosen each other in the first place. One Saturday morning, they escaped the chaos of the city and drove to a secluded park outside town. The autumn leaves crunched underfoot as they walked hand in hand, laughing at nothing in particular. When Emma tripped over a tree root, Victoria caught her mid-fall, pulling her close with a teasing grin. "Careful," Victoria murmured, her breath warm against Emma's ear. "I can't have my prosecutor injuring herself before trial." Emma rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a smile. "Oh, please. Like you'd survive without me." They sat on a bench overlooking a tranquil pond, sharing stories about their childhoods and dreams for the future. For those few hours, the world outside faded away, leaving only the two of them, a bubble of peace amidst the storm. Even small gestures became anchors of tenderness. On particularly tough days, Emma left sticky notes with encouraging messages tucked into Victoria's briefcase. Victoria, in turn, surprised Emma with her favorite latte during late-night work sessions. These acts of kindness weren't grand, but they spoke volumes about the depth of their connection. As the investigation drew to a close, the pressure mounted. The final hearing loomed large, promising either vindication or ruin for Victoria. Both women knew the stakes. If convicted, Victoria's career, and possibly their relationship, would be irreparably damaged. Yet instead of retreating, they leaned into each other, drawing strength from their shared determination. On the morning of the trial, Emma stood beside Victoria in the courthouse hallway, adjusting her blazer nervously. "Ready?" she asked, though her voice betrayed her anxiety. Victoria took a deep breath, straightening her posture. "As ready as I'll ever be." Then, lowering her voice, she added, "Thank you for standing by me. For believing in me." Emma squeezed her hand, her expression resolute. "Always." Inside the courtroom, tensions ran high. Witnesses testified, evidence was presented, and arguments flew back and forth. But through it all, Victoria remained composed, her confidence bolstered by the knowledge that Emma believed in her innocence. When the verdict came down, acquittal, it felt like a collective exhale. They had survived the worst of it. That night, they celebrated quietly at home, curled up on the couch with takeout and champagne. The room glowed softly with candlelight, casting shadows that danced along the walls. As they clinked glasses, Victoria raised hers with a wry smile. "To us," she said simply. "Against all odds." Emma laughed, leaning into her embrace. "Here's to proving everyone wrong." For the first time in months, they allowed themselves to relax, to truly savor the victory they'd fought so hard for. Love hadn't been the easiest path, but it had been the most rewarding. The morning after the storm came too quickly, dragging me out of a restless sleep and into the harsh light of reality. I woke up tangled in Evelyn's sheets, the faint scent of her perfume still lingering on the pillow beside me. For a moment, I allowed myself to bask in the memory of the night before, the way she had held me, kissed me, whispered my name like it was the only word that mattered. But as the haze of sleep faded, the weight of what we'd done settled over me like a suffocating blanket. Evelyn wasn't there when I opened my eyes. The bed was cold on her side, the indentation of her body already fading. Panic bubbled in my chest as I sat up, clutching the sheet around me like a shield. Had she regretted it? Was this all some terrible mistake? I found her in the kitchen, dressed in one of her signature tailored blazers and sipping coffee at the counter. She looked every bit the composed CEO I'd always known, except for the dark circles under her eyes and the way her hands trembled slightly as she set the mug down. "Good morning," she said without turning to face me. Her tone was neutral, but there was an edge to it that made my stomach churn. "Morning," I replied cautiously, wrapping the sheet tighter around myself as though it could protect me from whatever was coming next. "You okay?" She hesitated, then turned to look at me. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of professionalism that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We need to talk." Those 4 words sent a jolt of dread through me. They were the prelude to every breakup, every confrontation, every moment of heartbreak I'd ever experienced. Still, I nodded and forced myself to meet her gaze. "Okay. Talk." Evelyn sighed, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair, a rare sign of frustration. "Last night wasn't planned. It shouldn't have happened." My heart sank, though I tried to hide it. But it did happen. And now we have to figure out what it means. "That's just it," she said sharply, her composure slipping for a brief moment. "I don't know what it means. I don't know how to balance this, us, with everything else. My career. Your position at the company. The scrutiny we'll face if anyone finds out." Her words stung, not because they were cruel but because they were true. We lived in a world where appearances mattered more than substance, where relationships like ours were met with judgment and disdain. Even within the relative safety of our own lives, the risks were immense. If word got out, it could destroy both of our careers, and possibly something far more precious. "I'm not asking you to have all the answers right now," I said softly, stepping closer despite the tension crackling between us. "But I am asking you to trust me. To trust us." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might push me away again. Instead, she reached out and took my hand, her grip firm yet hesitant. "I want to trust you, Clara. More than anything. But I can't ignore the consequences. Not just for us, but for everyone involved." By the time I returned to work later that day, the guilt was already eating away at me. I avoided eye contact with my coworkers, terrified they might somehow see the truth written all over my face. Every casual conversation felt like an interrogation, every glance in my direction a potential accusation. Even the familiar hum of the office seemed louder, more oppressive, as though the walls themselves were closing, and Evelyn acted as though nothing had changed. She breezed through meetings with her usual efficiency, her demeanor cool and collected. To anyone else, she was the same untouchable CEO who ruled the company with an iron fist. But I saw the cracks beneath the surface, the slight tremor in her voice during presentations, the way her eyes darted toward me whenever she thought no one was looking. She was struggling just as much as I was, even if she refused to show it. The first real test came 2 days later, during a team lunch at a nearby cafe. Evelyn rarely attended these gatherings, preferring to keep her distance from the social dynamics of the office. But today, she joined us unexpectedly, sliding into the booth across from me with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So, Clara," one of my colleagues piped up, oblivious to the tension simmering between Evelyn and me. "Any plans for the weekend? Seeing anyone special?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut, and I froze, unsure how to respond. Before I could stammer out an answer, Evelyn interjected smoothly. "Clara's been focused on work lately. No time for distractions." Her tone was light, almost teasing, but the underlying message was clear: don't say anything. I forced a laugh, nodding in agreement, but inside, I felt sick. How long could we keep pretending? How long before someone noticed the way her gaze lingered on me just a fraction too long, or the way my breath hitched whenever she entered the room? After lunch, Evelyn pulled me aside under the guise of discussing a project deadline. We stood in the shadow of the building, hidden from prying eyes, though neither of us spoke for a long moment. Finally, she broke the silence. "You handled that well," she said quietly, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of distress. "I shouldn't have to handle it at all," I shot back, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "This isn't fair, Evelyn. We're tiptoeing around each other like we're doing something wrong. Like we should be ashamed." "We are doing something wrong," she snapped, her composure cracking for the first time since the incident. "Do you think I don't feel it too? The guilt? The fear? But we don't have a choice, Clara. Not if we want to protect ourselves, and each other." Her words cut deep, not because they were untrue but because they highlighted the impossible position we were in. She was right, we couldn't afford to be reckless. But that didn't make it hurt any less. Things only grew more complicated over the following weeks. Rumors began circulating around the office, whispers about Evelyn's behavior, speculations about why she suddenly seemed so invested in mentoring me. At first, I dismissed them as harmless gossip, the kind of idle chatter that thrived in corporate environments. But when Lila showed up unannounced at Evelyn's apartment one evening, the stakes became painfully cleared. I had stayed late to help Evelyn finalize a presentation, and we were sitting on the couch when the doorbell rang. Evelyn stiffened, her eyes narrowing as she rose to answer it. When she opened the door, Lila stood there, her fiery hair damp from the rain and her expression stormy. "Can we talk?" Lila demanded, brushing past Evelyn without waiting for an invitation. Her gaze landed on me, and her lips curled into a knowing smirk. "Oh, am I interrupting something?" "No," Evelyn said firmly, closing the door behind her sister. "What do you want, Lila?" Lila ignored the question, striding further into the apartment until she was standing directly in front of me. "So this is her," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "The mysterious colleague you've been spending so much time with." "It's none of your business," Evelyn snapped, moving to stand between us. "Whatever issues you have with me, leave Clara out of it." "Oh, I plan to," Lila replied sweetly, though her eyes gleamed with malice. "For now. But if anyone else starts asking questions," she let the threat hang in the air, unspoken yet unmistakable. My blood ran cold as I realized the danger we were in, not just from Lila, but from anyone who might piece together the truth. Evelyn's reputation, her career, everything she had worked for, it could all come crashing down because of us. When Lila finally left, slamming the door behind her, Evelyn sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she muttered, her voice muffled by despair. "If she tells anyone, she won't," I said quickly, kneeling beside her and placing a hand on her knee. "We'll figure this out. Together." But even as I said the words, doubt gnawed at me. Could we really survive this? Or were we destined to crumble under the weight of our secrets? The days that followed Lila's visit felt like walking a tightrope. Every interaction, every glance, carried the weight of unspoken fears and simmering tensions. Evelyn became more distant at work, retreating behind her usual armor of professionalism as though trying to convince herself, and everyone else, that nothing had changed. But I could see the cracks forming, the toll it was taking on her. Late nights in her office turned into sleepless ones, and the sharpness of her wit dulled under the strain of carrying secrets too heavy for one person alone. For my part, I tried to keep up appearances, but it was exhausting. The guilt gnawed at me constantly, not because I regretted what had happened between us, but because I hated seeing her suffer. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Love, or whatever it was we shared, shouldn't feel like a burden. Yet here we were, trapped in a web of our own making, unable to move forward without risking everything. One evening, after another grueling day at the office, Evelyn called me into her office just as the last stragglers were leaving. Her expression was unreadable, her voice clipped when she spoke. "We need to settle this. Once and for all." My stomach tightened. Settle it? What did that even mean? Was she ready to end things before they'd truly begun? Or was she finally willing to face the truth head-on? She gestured for me to sit, then leaned back in her chair, studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began slowly, choosing her words carefully. About trust. About us. And I realized something: I can't keep living like this. Pretending. Hiding. It's killing me. Her admission caught me off guard. For weeks, she had resisted any notion of vulnerability, clinging to control as though it were the only thing keeping her afloat. But now, sitting across from me, she looked fragile, human, in a way I hadn't seen since the night we first kissed. "What are you saying?" I asked cautiously, afraid to hope. "I'm saying," she paused, exhaling sharply as though steeling herself for what came next. "I'm saying I don't want to lose you. Not again. Not ever. But if we're going to do this, if we're going to be something, we have to stop running from it. From us." Her words sent a rush of warmth through me, but also a flicker of fear. "And what about everything else? The risks? The fallout?" "I won't lie to you," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her eyes. "It won't be easy. There will be consequences. People will talk. Maybe even try to tear us apart. But I'd rather face all of that than spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been." Tears welled in my eyes, blurring her features as I struggled to process what she was offering: not just a relationship, but a partnership. A commitment to fight for each other, no matter the cost. "But how?" I whispered, my voice breaking slightly. "How do we make this work?" "One step at a time," she replied, reaching across the desk to take my hand. Her touch was warm, grounding, a reminder that we weren't alone in this. "We start by being honest, with ourselves, with each other. Then we figure out the rest together." That weekend, we took the first step. Evelyn invited me to a quiet cabin she owned outside the city, a place she rarely spoke about but clearly cherished. Nestled deep in the woods, it was a sanctuary away from prying eyes and judgmental whispers. The air smelled of pine and earth, and the only sounds were the rustling leaves and distant chirping of birds. As we sat by the fireplace that night, wrapped in blankets and sipping hot cocoa, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. For the first time, there was no pretense, no walls between us. Just two people learning to navigate the messy, beautiful terrain of love. "I used to think I had everything figured out," Evelyn mused, staring into the flames. "My career, my life, everything neatly planned. And then you came along and turned it all upside down. Is that a bad thing?" I teased, nudging her gently. She smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. "No. It's terrifying. But it's also freeing. Like maybe I don't have to be perfect all the time. Maybe I can just be." Her words resonated deeply, echoing the lessons I'd learned along the way. Love wasn't about perfection or control, it was about embracing imperfection, about finding beauty in the chaos. Together, we were stronger, not because we had all the answers, but because we were willing to ask the hard questions. When we returned to the city, things didn't magically fall into place. Rumors still swirled, and Lila remained a looming threat. But we faced them together, side by side, refusing to let fear dictate our choices. Slowly, painfully, we carved out a space for ourselves, a fragile yet resilient bond built on trust, honesty, and the courage to defy expectations. In the end, it wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about choosing each other, again and again, even when the path ahead was uncertain. Even when the world seemed determined to pull us apart. As we stood on the rooftop of her building one crisp autumn evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Evelyn slipped her hand into mine. "Whatever happens next," she said softly, her breath visible in the cool air, "we'll face it together." I squeezed her hand, leaning my head against her shoulder. Together. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it.